For 15 years, Victor Reynolds manipulated the justice system, destroying innocent lives with his pen. No one dared challenge him until a lawyer named Rachel discovered his darkest secret. While he buried people inside cells, she gathered evidence that would put Chicago's most powerful prosecutor behind the very same bars he so loved to use against others. Before we go on, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. The air inside Chicago's Superior Court felt heavy, filtered through decades of questionable convictions. Rachel Morgan sensed its weight as she walked through the dark wooden double doors, her leather briefcase tapping lightly against her leg. Courtroom number 7 had its own reputation. It was the domain of prosecutor Victor Reynolds, a man who hadn't lost a single homicide case in 15 years. People said he could smell guilt from miles away. What no one dared mention was that Reynolds had a special talent for fabricating it when necessary. Rachel adjusted the navy blue blazer over her dress and felt the gaze of veteran lawyers as she, a 32-year-old black attorney, headed to the defense table. It had been only 4 years since she'd left the public defender's office to open her own practice, and here she was, about to face the city's most feared prosecutor. Ms. Morgan, Reynolds' voice cut through the air before she could even set her briefcase on the table. He didn't turn to face her, continuing to meticulously organize his documents. I didn't expect to see you here today. I thought my plea offer was persuasive. There was something in the way he pronounced persuasive that made Rachel tighten her fingers around her briefcase strap. My client has pled not guilty, Mr. Reynolds. He declined the deal. Reynolds finally turned, a thin smile drawn across his pale face. At 58, with perfectly trimmed grey hair and a suit that cost more than Rachel's monthly office rent, he exuded the kind of confidence that only comes with the certainty of power. Poor judgment, he said, adjusting his blue tie with small gold details. But rookies make mistakes, don't they? Before Rachel could respond, the doors opened and officers brought in her client. Marcus Johnson, 34, an IT technician with no criminal record, accused of murdering his ex-girlfriend, Alicia Winters. His dark skin contrasted sharply with the orange prison uniform, and his eyes met Rachel's with a mixture of fear and hope. It's going to be okay, she murmured as he sat beside her. They won't listen to me, Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. They never have. The side door opened, and Judge Walter Hoffman entered the room. At 70 years old, with 25 years on the bench, Hoffman was known for his apparent impartiality and his friendship with Reynolds, a contradiction no one dared question. All rise, announced the officer. As everyone stood, Rachel noticed a note left on her table. She unfolded it discreetly. Drop the case. You don't know what you're getting into. A friend. Rachel crumpled the paper, feeling her heart rate quicken. It was the 3rd threat this week. Case number 47291, State of Illinois versus Marcus Johnson, Judge Hoffman announced, putting on his glasses. I understand the defense maintains the not guilty plea. Rachel stood, lifting her chin. Yes, Your Honor. My client is innocent, and we intend to prove it. Reynolds let out an almost imperceptible sigh, the kind of reaction that would normally go unnoticed, but Rachel caught it. She knew that sigh well, that of a man unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a black woman. Mr. Reynolds, Judge Hoffman turned to the prosecutor, is the state ready to present its opening? Reynolds rose with the calm of a confident predator. More than ready, Your Honor. As he walked toward the jury, 12 citizens, only 2 of them black. Rachel knew she was at a disadvantage, but she hadn't come this far to back down. For most people present, this was just another case in courtroom number 7, another likely win for Victor Reynolds, another black man on his way to prison. But what nobody knew was that Rachel had something Reynolds would never expect: evidence. For 3 months, she had meticulously investigated Reynolds' last 15 cases involving black defendants. A pattern had emerged. Witnesses who changed testimonies at the last minute, evidence that appeared miraculously, overworked public defenders who barely had time to meet their clients before trials. Marcus wasn't the only one. He was just another in a long line of men and women Reynolds had sent behind bars using methods that were questionable at best. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Reynolds began, his voice resonating through the room like velvet over steel. "What I'm going to present to you today isn't just a murder case. It's the story of a man who, rejected by the woman he claimed to love, chose violence over acceptance." Rachel watched as he wove his narrative with the precision of a novelist, painting Marcus as a jealous, uncontrolled monster. She knew that soon would come the photo of Alicia Winters, a 32-year-old white woman, smiling at the camera, a technique Reynolds always used to evoke jury empathy. Marcus's defense hinged on one thing: the truth. Rachel had discovered that on the night of the murder, Marcus was at a hospital 20 miles away, visiting his sick mother. The hospital's security system had records of his entry and exit, but mysteriously, those records had disappeared from the official evidence. More disturbing still, the real killer might be Chad Winters, Alicia's brother, a man with a history of domestic violence and a massive debt to local drug dealers. Alicia had recently inherited a significant sum of money from her grandmother, money that was now in Chad's hands. The prosecution calls Detective Robert Simmons as its first witness, Reynolds announced as he concluded his opening. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Detective Simmons, the same detective who appeared in 8 of the 15 cases she had investigated, the same man who, coincidentally, had been Reynolds' partner when they were both police officers 20 years ago. As the detective took his place on the witness stand, Rachel felt Marcus's gaze on her. "They're all in this together, aren't they?" he whispered. Rachel didn't respond immediately, observing how Reynolds and Simmons exchanged an almost imperceptible look. "Yes," she finally confirmed, lowering her voice. "But that's exactly why we're going to beat them." What Rachel didn't tell Marcus at that moment was about the person who had given her crucial information about Reynolds' previous cases, a former detective named Michael Carter, who had worked with Reynolds and Simmons until he was forced to retire after accusing the department of institutional racism. Carter, now a private investigator battling alcoholism and depression, had become her unlikely ally in this battle. "Detective Simmons," Reynolds' voice sounded confident, "please tell the jury what you found at the crime scene on the night of March 15th. While Simmons began his carefully rehearsed testimony, Rachel discreetly opened a file in her briefcase. Inside was a photograph, Reynolds and Simmons at an expensive restaurant in the company of Walter Richards, the owner of the security company responsible for the cameras in Alicia's building, cameras that, conveniently, failed on the night of the murder. The photo had been taken just 2 days before the murder. Rachel closed the file and took a deep breath. The case was just beginning, and she knew she would be fighting not just a corrupt prosecutor, but an entire system designed to protect men like him. What Victor Reynolds didn't know was that Rachel Morgan had learned early on that when the game is rigged against you, the only option is to change the rules. And she was more than prepared to do exactly that. As Detective Simmons continued his testimony, Rachel observed the jury. Their eyes were fixed on this tall, authoritative figure with salt and pepper hair who spoke with such unwavering certainty. Simmons was good, too good, at appearing credible. "The victim had defensive wounds on her hands," Simmons explained, gesturing to crime scene photos displayed on a large screen. "Forensics confirmed the DNA under her fingernails matched the defendant's." Reynolds nodded with practiced gravity. "And what about the murder weapon, Detective?" "A kitchen knife found in a dumpster 3 blocks from the scene. It had the defendant's fingerprints all over it." Too convenient, Rachel thought. Every piece of evidence pointed directly at Marcus, as if someone had carefully arranged a trail of breadcrumbs for the police to follow. When it was her turn for cross-examination, Rachel approached the stand with measured steps. "Detective Simmons, you testified that you've been investigating homicides for 17 years. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his tone slightly condescending on the ma'am. "And in your experience, do killers typically leave such obvious evidence behind? Their DNA, their fingerprints, practically signing their work?" Reynolds was on his feet instantly. "Objection. Argumentative. Sustained," Judge Hoffman said without hesitation. "Ms. Morgan, stick to factual questions." Rachel nodded respectfully. "Detective, was Marcus Johnson's mother interviewed as part of your investigation?" Simmons shifted in his seat. "I don't recall speaking with his mother." "That's interesting, because she states that Marcus was with her at Northwestern Memorial Hospital on the night of the murder. Did you check the hospital's visitor logs or security footage?" "We followed the evidence, Counselor, and all evidence pointed to your client." "So that's a no," Rachel said, letting the words hang in the air. "You didn't investigate a potential alibi. Did you also not investigate Chad Winters, the victim's brother, who owed $50,000 to local drug dealers and suddenly paid off that debt just days after his sister's murder?" "Objection!" Reynolds nearly shouted. "Counsel is testifying, not questioning." "Sustained," Judge Hoffman snapped. "The jury will disregard defense counsel's statements." Rachel maintained her composure. "One final question, Detective. Have you ever had dinner at Antonio's Steakhouse with Prosecutor Reynolds?" Simmons blinked. "We've worked together for years. I suppose we might have." "And Walter Richards, CEO of City Secure Systems, the company responsible for the security cameras in Alicia Winters' building, have you dined with him as well?" The courtroom went silent. Reynolds stood again, his face flushed. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is inappropriate and irrelevant." "I'm establishing potential conflicts of interest, Your Honor," Rachel countered. Judge Hoffman's face darkened. "In my chambers, now, both of you." 20 minutes later, inside the judge's wood-paneled chambers, Rachel stood her ground as Reynolds and Hoffman stared her down. "You're making serious accusations with no foundation," Reynolds hissed. "This is grounds for sanctions." Judge Hoffman removed his glasses. "Ms. Morgan, I've known Victor Reynolds for 20 years. He's one of the most respected prosecutors in this state. Whatever game you're playing stops now, or I will hold you in contempt." Rachel met his gaze. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm not playing a game. I'm representing my client to the best of my abilities, as I'm ethically obligated to do." "Watch yourself, Counselor," Hoffman warned. "Court resumes in 10 minutes. As they filed out, Reynolds leaned close to Rachel's ear. "You have no idea what you're doing. Walk away while you still can." "Like your last 9 opponents did?" Rachel replied quietly. "I don't scare that easily." She returned to the defense table, where Marcus waited anxiously. "What happened?" "They're nervous," she whispered, "and that's exactly what we want." As the trial continued, Rachel meticulously challenged each piece of evidence. The DNA results that seemed too perfect, the convenient timing of the discovery of the murder weapon, the mysteriously missing hospital records. During a recess, Rachel slipped into a small coffee shop across from the courthouse. Michael Carter was waiting in a corner booth, his weathered face partially hidden behind a Chicago Cubs cap. At 56, the former detective looked a decade older, years of fighting a corrupt system etched into the lines around his eyes. "You're really poking the bear," he said as she sat down. Rachel ordered black coffee. "You said yourself that Reynolds has been framing people for years." "Yeah, and look what happened to me when I tried to expose it." Carter's hand trembled slightly as he raised his cup. "Lost my badge, my pension, my marriage, but not your conscience," Rachel said. Carter's laugh was hollow. "Fat lot of good that does me." He slid a manila envelope across the table. "Found something. A tech who works at the hospital. He kept a backup of the security footage from that night. Shows your client clear as day, visiting his mother from 7:30 to 9:45 p.m. Rachel's heart raced. "The murder happened at 8:30. "Exactly. But if you use this in court, they'll know someone leaked it." "I'll find a way," she promised, tucking the envelope into her bag. When Rachel returned to the courthouse, she noticed a dark sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted. The same car had been outside her apartment that morning. Inside, the afternoon session began with Reynolds calling Chad Winters to the stand. Alicia's brother was thin and nervous, with bloodshot eyes and a designer watch that looked too expensive for a man who claimed to work part-time at a gym. Reynolds guided him through gentle questions about his sister, painting a picture of a loving relationship brutally cut short by Marcus's jealous rage. When it was Rachel's turn, she approached slowly. "Mr. Winters, when was the last time you saw your sister alive?" "The morning before it happened," Chad replied, his voice breaking. "We had coffee together, and she mentioned she was afraid of my client." "Yes," Chad nodded vigorously. "She was terrified of him." Rachel consulted her notes. "Interesting, because, according to her best friend's statement, Alicia told her she hadn't spoken to you in months, not since you asked to borrow money again." Chad's face hardened. "That's not true. Mr. Winters, did you owe money to Darius Coleman and his crew?" Reynolds jumped up. "Objection! Relevance! Goes to motive, Your Honor," Rachel countered. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully," Hoffman warned. Chad's forehead glistened with sweat. "I had some gambling debts. Nothing serious." $50,000 isn't serious?" Rachel asked. "And yet, 2 days after your sister's murder, you paid off that entire amount in cash. Where did that money come from, Mr. Winters?" The gallery erupted in whispers. Chad's eyes darted to Reynolds, who looked stunned for the first time since the trial began. "Objection!" Reynolds shouted. "This is outrageous speculation." "Your Honor," Rachel said calmly, "I have bank records showing Mr. Winters deposited exactly $50,000 in cash the day after his sister's funeral, the same day her life insurance paid out to him as her sole beneficiary." Judge Hoffman's gavel came down hard. "Approach the bench, now." As the day ended, Rachel knew she had struck a nerve. Reynolds was no longer dismissive. Now he was threatened. But as she left the courthouse, 2 police officers approached her. "Rachel Morgan," one asked, "we need you to come with us." "Am I under arrest?" she asked, heart-pounding. "No, ma'am, but Detective Williams has some questions about potential evidence tampering in the Johnson case." As they escorted her to a waiting police car, Rachel caught a glimpse of Reynolds watching from the courthouse steps, a small smile playing on his lips. The game had changed, but what Reynolds didn't know was that Rachel had anticipated this move. Michael Carter was already delivering copies of all their evidence to selected journalists, with instructions to release everything if anything happened to her. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun. Second stage of development. The interrogation room at Chicago Police Headquarters was deliberately uncomfortable, too cold, chairs too hard, lighting too harsh. Rachel sat with perfect posture, hands folded on the metal table, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. Detective Williams, a stocky man with thinning hair and tired eyes, paced the room. "Ms. Morgan, we have reason to believe you're in possession of evidence that wasn't properly obtained through discovery." "What evidence would that be, Detective?" Rachel asked calmly. Williams slapped a folder on the table. "Hospital security footage showing your client on the night of Alicia Winters' murder. Footage that mysteriously disappeared from official records, but somehow ended up in your possession." Rachel maintained her neutral expression. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Really? Because someone accessed those backup files yesterday, and now you're suddenly suggesting your client has an alibi." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Are you investigating a murder, Detective Williams, or are you investigating me? Because I find it interesting that you're more concerned with how the defense might prove a man's innocence than with finding the actual killer." Williams's face flushed. "Don't lecture me about justice, counselor. I've been working homicide for 18 years. "Then you should recognize a frame job when you see one." The door opened, and a woman in a crisp suit entered. "This interview is over," she announced. "I'm Diane Roberts, Ms. Morgan's attorney." Rachel had never met this woman before, but managed to hide her surprise. Williams scoffed. "We're just having a conversation." "A conversation that's now concluded," Diane replied firmly. "Unless you're charging my client, we're leaving." Outside the station, Rachel turned to the stranger. "Thank you, but who are you?" The woman handed Rachel a business card. "Michael Carter sent me, said you might need some help." She glanced around the parking lot. "Don't talk here. There's a cafe 3 blocks down. Meet me there in 20 minutes. Rachel watched Diane walk away, then checked her phone. 5 missed calls from Marcus's family and 1 text from Carter. "They're searching your office. Don't go back there tonight." At the cafe, Diane was waiting in a corner booth. Around 50, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp eyes, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought many battles in Chicago's legal system. "I used to work with Carter," Diane explained once Rachel sat down. "Before Reynolds and his crew pushed him out. I've been watching Reynolds for years, building a case." "A case for what?" "Prosecutorial misconduct, civil rights violations, maybe even criminal conspiracy." Diane lowered her voice. "You're not the first defense attorney to challenge him, but you're getting closer than anyone has before." Rachel stirred her coffee. "Earlier today, I suggested Chad Winters might be the real killer. Moments later, I'm being brought in for questioning about evidence tampering." "Reynolds has half the department in his pocket," Diane said. "You threaten his perfect conviction record, he'll use every resource to shut you down. So what now? You need to be smarter than them. More strategic." Diane pulled out a small recording device. "Carter said you have hospital footage proving your client's alibi." Rachel nodded. "Don't use it yet. If you reveal it now, they'll claim it's fabricated. You need to build a trap and let Reynolds walk right into it." Back at her apartment, Rachel found the door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open slowly. Inside, everything had been searched. Drawers pulled out, cushions overturned, books swept from shelves. She carefully checked each room. The intruders were gone, but so was her laptop and the case files she kept at home. Only one thing remained untouched: a framed photo of her father, who had died in prison 15 years ago, convicted of a crime he didn't commit. Victor Reynolds had been the prosecutor. Rachel picked up the photo, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with rage. This wasn't just about Marcus Johnson anymore. This was personal. The next morning, Rachel arrived at court early, purposely using the main entrance where news crews gathered. Cameras turned toward her as she approached the steps. "Ms. Morgan," a reporter called out, "do you have a response to the allegations that you tampered with evidence?" Rachel stopped, looking directly into the cameras. "I represent an innocent man being railroaded by a system that decided his guilt before hearing a single piece of evidence. If seeking the truth is now considered tampering, then our justice system is more broken than I thought." Inside the courtroom, Reynolds was already at the prosecution table. "Bold move talking to the press," he remarked without looking up. "Just exercising my First Amendment rights," Rachel replied, setting down her replacement briefcase. "You know," Reynolds said quietly, "I prosecuted your father, Thomas Morgan. Armed robbery, wasn't it? He maintained his innocence too." Rachel's hand froze midway to her chair. "You remember him?" "I remember all my cases, Ms. Morgan." Now Reynolds looked up, his eyes cold. "Your father died in prison, 8 years into a 20-year sentence." "Tragic." Rachel held his gaze. "He was innocent, just like Marcus Johnson." Reynolds shrugged. "The jury disagreed, just like they will today." As the courtroom filled, Marcus was brought in. He looked more haggard than the day before. "They came to my cell last night," he whispered as he sat beside Rachel. "2 guards said they'd make sure I never made it to prison if I didn't confess." Rachel clenched her jaw. "Did anyone see them?" "No, but they took my commissary privileges, said it was for disrespecting an officer." Judge Hoffman entered, and the day's proceedings began. Reynolds called a new witness, Dr. Emma Chen, the medical examiner who had performed Alicia Winters' autopsy. Dr. Chen testified methodically about the cause of death, multiple stab wounds, one piercing the heart. Reynolds guided her through the testimony with practiced ease, establishing the timeline of death between 8:15 and 8:45 p.m., precisely when Marcus was supposedly at the scene. During cross-examination, Rachel approached carefully. Dr. Chen, in your report, you noted the killer was likely right-handed, correct? Yes, based on the angle of the wounds. And you're aware my client is left-handed, Reynolds interrupted. Objection. This wasn't established in evidence. I can demonstrate it right now, Rachel countered. Overruled, Hoffman said. The witness may answer. Dr. Chen hesitated. I wasn't aware of that detail. Also, your report mentioned the killer likely had significant upper body strength, suggesting a height of at least 6 feet. My client is 5'9". Did Detective Simmons share that information with you? No, he didn't. One more question, Rachel said. The prosecution has suggested this was a crime of passion, yet your report indicates the fatal wound was delivered with surgical precision. Does that align with the frenzied attack theory? Dr. Chen glanced at Reynolds before answering. It doesn't seem consistent with an emotional outburst. During the lunch recess, Rachel received a text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level 3, now. She found Michael Carter waiting between 2 concrete pillars, looking more sober than she'd seen him in weeks. I figured out how they're doing it, Carter said without preamble. Reynolds has a pattern. He targets cases with minimal evidence, then builds his case backward, plants evidence, coaches witnesses, sometimes even pays people off. We need proof, Rachel said. That's why I'm here. Carter handed her a flash drive. Got this from a buddy in IT. It's Reynolds' email communications with Simmons over the past 2 years. There's a code they use for cases they're fixing. This could be our smoking gun. Rachel tucked the drive away. But how do we use it without revealing our source? Carter's face was grim. That's the problem. My friend risked everything to get this. If it comes out, he's done. Then we need to force Reynolds to expose himself, Rachel said, an idea forming. And I think I know how. That afternoon, Rachel cross-examined Chad Winters with renewed purpose. Mr. Winters, you testified that you and your sister were close, correct? Yes. Very close. Chad's confidence had returned overnight, yet her best friend says you hadn't spoken in months. Her neighbor says she had changed her locks to keep you out, and her diary— Rachel paused, watching Chad's expression carefully. Mentioned she was afraid of you discovering something. Chad's face paled. What diary? Alicia didn't keep a diary. Rachel smiled slightly. Interesting that you'd know that, considering police never found one in her apartment. Reynolds was on his feet. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Hoffman ruled immediately. Rachel continued, Mr. Winters, where were you between 8 and 9 p.m. on the night your sister was killed? I told the police I was at Finnegan's bar with friends. These friends have names? Chad hesitated. Just guys from the gym. I don't remember exactly who was there. So no alibi witnesses, Rachel noted. Finally, Mr. Winters, could you please sign your name on this pad for the court? Reynolds objected again, but Hoffman allowed it, curious. Chad signed with his right hand, then slid the pad back. You're right-handed, Rachel observed, just like the person who killed Alicia, according to the medical examiner. You're also 6'2", matching Dr. Chen's assessment of the killer's height. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hoffman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. As the day ended, Reynolds approached Rachel outside the courtroom. His composed facade had cracked, revealing barely contained fury. You're playing a dangerous game, Morgan. No game, Reynolds, just the truth, something you've been avoiding for 15 years. His voice dropped to a whisper. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, Rachel replied, I think I do. And tomorrow, so will everyone else. As she walked away, Rachel felt a mix of fear and determination. The stakes had never been higher, and tomorrow would decide everything. Not just for Marcus Johnson, but for every person Reynolds had wrongfully sent to prison, and for her father's memory. Third stage of development. Morning broke over Chicago with a heavy grey sky threatening rain, fitting weather for what Rachel knew would be the most crucial day of the trial. She arrived at the courthouse to find television vans and reporters clustered on the steps. Word had spread that the seemingly open and shut case against Marcus Johnson had transformed into something far more contentious. Rachel spotted Diane Roberts waiting by the entrance, her expression grave. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," Diane said quietly as they walked inside together. "Reynolds has been making calls all night. Judge Hoffman had an emergency meeting with the district attorney at 6 a.m. "They're panicking," Rachel replied, gripping her briefcase tighter. Inside was the flash drive Carter had given her, along with documents she'd stayed up all night preparing. "Be careful," Diane warned. "Cornered animals are the most dangerous." The courtroom was packed as Rachel took her place at the defense table. Marcus was brought in moments later, the strain of the past days visible in the dark circles under his eyes. "There are news cameras outside," he whispered. "What's happening?" "Justice," Rachel answered simply. When Judge Hoffman entered, his usual stern demeanor seemed intensified, his movements stiff with tension. Reynolds followed shortly after, immaculately dressed as always, but Rachel noted the slight tremor in his hands as he arranged his papers. "Before we proceed," Hoffman announced, "the prosecution has a statement." Reynolds stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, after reviewing some of the evidence brought forward by defense counsel, the state wishes to amend certain aspects of its case." A murmur ran through the gallery. Rachel remained perfectly still, watching. "The prosecution acknowledges that there may have been—" Reynolds paused, choosing his words carefully. "Oversights in the investigation. However, we maintain that the defendant is guilty. We simply wish to focus the jury's attention on the most pertinent evidence." Rachel recognized the strategy immediately. Reynolds was attempting to get ahead of the narrative, to sacrifice minor points to salvage his case. It was a tactical retreat. "Ms. Morgan," Judge Hoffman turned to her, "you may call your next witness." The defense calls Michael Carter to the stand. Reynolds' head snapped up, genuine surprise crossing his features as the former detective entered the courtroom. Carter walked slowly to the witness stand, his back straight despite years of alcohol abuse that had taken their toll. He was sober today, his eyes clear and determined. After Carter was sworn in, Rachel approached. "Mr. Carter, could you please state your former occupation for the court?" "I was a detective with the Chicago Police Department for 22 years, working primarily in homicide." "And did you work with Detective Robert Simmons?" "Yes, for 7 years. We were partners." "Did you also work with Prosecutor Victor Reynolds when he was still with the police department?" Carter nodded. "Yes, for about 5 years before he moved to the DA's office." Rachel paced slowly. "Mr. Carter, why did you leave?" Traveled briefly to Reynolds before returning to Rachel. "I was forced into early retirement after raising concerns about certain investigative practices." "What kind of practices?" Reynolds stood. "Objection. This has no relevance to the current case." "Your Honor," Rachel countered, "this witness will establish a pattern of conduct directly relevant to how the case against Marcus Johnson was constructed." Judge Hoffman hesitated, then nodded. "I'll allow it, but keep it focused, Counselor." Rachel turned back to Carter. "What practices concerned you, Mr. Carter?" "I noticed that in cases where the evidence was thin, especially against black defendants, evidence would sometimes appear that wasn't there before. Witnesses would suddenly remember critical details. Alibis would vanish." "And did you bring these concerns to anyone's attention?" "I reported them to Internal Affairs. 2 weeks later, I was under investigation for evidence tampering myself. 3 months after that, I was given a choice: retire quietly or face criminal charges." The courtroom was completely silent now, all eyes fixed on the former detective. "Mr. Carter, are you familiar with the investigation into Alicia Winter's murder?" "I've reviewed the case files. The pattern is identical to others I observed during my time with the department. Too perfect. Every piece of evidence points to one suspect, with no contradictions or loose ends. Real cases are messier." Reynolds was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. This witness was dismissed from the force for misconduct, and now he's making baseless accusations." "Not baseless," Rachel interrupted, producing a folder. "I have here sworn statements from 3 former clients of Mr. Reynolds, all claiming that evidence miraculously appeared after initial searches found nothing. I also have testimony from a lab technician who was pressured to rush results that incriminated defendants Mr. Reynolds was prosecuting. Judge Hoffman's face darkened. Approach the bench, both of you. At the bench, Reynolds hissed. This is a blatant attempt to distract from the facts of this case. Whatever vendetta this disgraced detective has against me, it's not a vendetta if it's true, Rachel cut in. Your Honor, I have electronic communications between Mr. Reynolds and Detective Simmons discussing how to handle certain cases, including references to making things clean for trials. Hoffman's eyes narrowed. How did you obtain these communications, Ms. Morgan? They were provided by a confidential source, but their authenticity can be verified by digital forensics. The judge turned to Reynolds. Is there any truth to these allegations? Reynolds' face had gone pale. Absolutely not. This is a desperate ploy by a defense attorney who knows she's losing. Then you won't object to the court appointing an independent investigator to review all the evidence in this case, Rachel suggested. Before Reynolds could respond, the courtroom doors burst open. A tall black woman in a suit entered, flanked by two men in FBI jackets. She strode directly to the bench and presented her credentials. Special Agent Tanya Washington, FBI, she announced loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Your Honor, we're here to serve a warrant related to an ongoing federal investigation into prosecutorial misconduct and civil rights violations. The gallery erupted. Judge Hoffman banged his gavel repeatedly as Reynolds stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Order! Order in my court! Hoffman shouted, but the damage was done. Reporters were already rushing out to break the story. Agent Washington approached Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, we need you to come with us to answer some questions. This is absurd, Reynolds sputtered, looking to Judge Hoffman for support. Your Honor, you can't allow this interruption of a trial in progress. But Hoffman's expression had changed. Self-preservation was clearly at the forefront of his mind as he assessed the situation. The court will take a recess until tomorrow morning while we address these developments. As the FBI agents escorted Reynolds out, he locked eyes with Rachel. Gone was the condescension, replaced by pure hatred. This isn't over, he mouthed. Rachel remained at the defense table, watching as the courtroom emptied in a flurry of excitement and confusion. Marcus sat beside her, stunned. What just happened? He asked. Justice happened, Rachel replied, or at least it's starting to. She didn't tell Marcus that she had been working with the FBI for weeks, feeding them information through Michael Carter, that the timing of their entrance had been carefully orchestrated, that this moment was the culmination of a plan set in motion the day she took his case. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Rachel. Ms. Morgan, did you know about the FBI investigation? How does this affect your client's case? Rachel faced the cameras calmly. Today, we've seen that no one is above the law, not even those entrusted to uphold it. My client has maintained his innocence from the beginning, and we believe this development confirms what we've been arguing all along. Marcus Johnson was framed for a crime he did not commit. Later that evening, Rachel sat in her apartment watching the news coverage unfold. The story had exploded nationwide. Victor Reynolds, the prosecutor with the perfect record, was under federal investigation for systematically railroading defendants, particularly black men, for over a decade. Her phone rang. It was Diane Roberts. You did it, Diane said. They're reopening 12 cases Reynolds prosecuted, and Chad Winters was just brought in for questioning about his sister's murder. Rachel looked at her father's photograph on the wall. It's a start, she said. But it's not over. No, Diane agreed. Reynolds has powerful friends. This won't be easy. Nothing worth fighting forever is. As Rachel hung up, she received a text message from an unknown number. You should have taken the deal. Watch your back. She stared at the message for a long moment, then set her phone down without replying. The threat didn't frighten her. For the first time in 15 years, she felt something else entirely. Hope. The rain fell steadily over Chicago on the final day of the trial, washing the city clean. Rachel stood at her apartment window, watching droplets race down the glass, each carving its own unpredictable path. It seemed fitting how justice, like water, eventually finds its way through even the smallest cracks in a corrupt foundation. 3 weeks had passed since the FBI had led Victor Reynolds from the courtroom. Those weeks had transformed the landscape of Chicago's justice system. 4 senior police officers had been suspended. Judge Hoffman had recused himself from all pending cases. The district attorney had announced a comprehensive review of every conviction Reynolds had secured over his 15-year career. And Chad Winters had confessed to murdering his sister. The evidence, once properly examined, had been overwhelming. Chad's DNA had been present at the scene, but dismissed as expected since he occasionally visited his sister. The knife had both siblings' fingerprints because it came from Alicia's kitchen. Most damning was the security footage from a nearby convenience store showing Chad near his sister's apartment at the exact time of the murder, footage Detective Simmons had intentionally overlooked. As Rachel prepared for court, her phone buzzed with a text from Michael Carter. "It's over. We won." But it wasn't quite over. Not yet. Rachel arrived at the courthouse to find a different atmosphere. The reporters remained, but their questions had changed from accusations to accolades. The public, always hungry for justice narratives, had embraced Rachel as a hero, the young black attorney who had brought down a corrupt prosecutor and freed an innocent man. The reality, as always, was more complicated. Inside the courtroom, now presided over by Judge Evelyn Martinez, Rachel sat beside Marcus. He looked different today, his prison jumpsuit replaced by a charcoal suit his mother had brought. Hope had restored something in his face that the system had nearly extinguished. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Martinez entered. The proceedings were brief. With Chad Winters' confession and the mountain of evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, the new prosecutor, a serious woman named Samantha Hayes, had filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Marcus Johnson. In light of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case, Judge Martinez declared, and the clear evidence of innocence, this court grants the motion to dismiss all charges against the defendant. Mr. Johnson, you are free to go. The words, simple and anticlimactic, belied their profound weight. 15 years of Reynolds' corruption exposed, a man's life restored, a system forced to confront its failures. Marcus turned to Rachel, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what she had done. She squeezed his hand. It was always about the truth. As they exited the courthouse together, Marcus was enveloped by his family. His elderly mother, his sisters, nieces and nephews, who hardly knew him but had prayed for this day. Rachel stood back, giving them space for their reunion. A voice behind her cut through the celebration. "You've made quite a name for yourself, counselor." Rachel turned to find Special Agent Washington. "That wasn't my goal." "Maybe not," Washington acknowledged, "but it's your reality now. People are watching you. Reynolds's allies aren't happy. I can handle them." Washington smiled slightly. "I believe you can. That's why I'm here. The Justice Department is establishing a task force to review cases of potential prosecutorial misconduct nationwide. We need someone who's been in the trenches, someone who understands what we're up against." Rachel considered this unexpected turn. "You're offering me a job. More like a mission. What you did for Marcus Johnson. We need to do that on a national scale. Systemic problems require systemic solutions." Before Rachel could respond, she noticed a familiar figure standing by the courthouse steps, Diane Roberts, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I need time to think about it," Rachel told Washington. "Of course, but don't take too long. The work doesn't wait." As Washington walked away, Marcus approached, finally free of his family's embrace. "What happens now?" he asked. Rachel smiled. "You live your life, Marcus, the one that was nearly stolen from you. And Reynolds? What happens to him? He'll face trial, whether he'll face justice." Rachel shrugged. "That's still being written." The rain had stopped, sunlight breaking through the clouds as they descended the courthouse steps. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, but Rachel guided Marcus through the crowd with quiet determination. At the bottom of the steps, Marcus stopped and turned to face her. "My mother told me something while we were in there. She said my case wasn't the first time you've gone up against Reynolds." Rachel's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her eyes. "Your father," Marcus continued, "Reynolds prosecuted him too, didn't he? And he died in prison, still claiming his innocence." She nodded once, a lifetime of pain contained in that simple gesture. "Thomas Morgan, armed robbery 2010. I was in high school. That's why you became a lawyer." "That's why I took your case," Rachel corrected. "I became a lawyer because I believed in justice. I took your case because I knew what Reynolds was capable of." Marcus studied her face. "So this wasn't just about me. It was always about justice," Rachel said. "For you, for my father, for everyone Reynolds hurt. Justice doesn't recognize singular cases. It's a current that runs through everything." They walked together to the street where Marcus's family waited. Before joining them, he turned to Rachel one last time. "Will you be okay after all this?" Rachel looked back at the courthouse, the institution that had both broken her father and given her the tools to fight back. "I'm just getting started." Later that evening, Rachel sat in her office. The day's newspapers spread across her desk. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Clients, journalists, other attorneys seeking her expertise. The spotlight was blinding, but she knew it would fade. The real work would continue in the shadows. Her father's photo sat on her desk, his smile preserved behind glass. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. There was a knock at her door. Michael Carter entered, looking better than he had in years. Sobriety had returned the sharpness to his eyes, and purpose had straightened his posture. "So," he said, settling into a chair across from her, "I heard the feds want to recruit you." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast. Justice moves slowly, but gossip moves at light speed." Carter leaned forward. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know. There's still so much work to do here." Carter nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were another idealistic lawyer who'd burn out once you saw how the system really works. And now? Now I think maybe the system needs to see how you work." He gestured to the stack of letters on her desk, people claiming wrongful conviction, families seeking help. "These people need you more than the government does." Rachel picked up one of the letters, feeling the weight of its desperate hope. "What about Reynolds? He still has friends in high places." "Which is exactly why you should stay and fight. Cutting off the head doesn't kill the snake if the body's still corrupt." Rachel smiled. "I thought you were the cynical one." "I was. You changed that." Carter stood to leave. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back. We all do." After he left, Rachel returned to the window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Chicago. Somewhere out there, Marcus Johnson was having dinner with his family for the first time in months. Somewhere else, Victor Reynolds was consulting with high-priced attorneys, plotting his defense, and in countless cells across the country, innocent people were still waiting for someone to hear their truth. Rachel made her decision. She wouldn't join the task force. Not yet. She would stay and build something here, a practice dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions, to holding prosecutors accountable, to forcing the system to live up to its promises. She picked up her phone and dialed Diane Roberts' number. "I've been thinking," Rachel said when Diane answered, "about starting a non-profit focused on prosecutorial accountability. I'd need a partner, someone experienced." There was a brief silence. Then Diane laughed. "You don't waste time, do you? Justice has been waiting long enough." "I'm in," Diane said without hesitation. "What are you going to call it?" Rachel looked at her father's photograph, at the stack of letters, at the newspaper headlines, declaring a new era in Chicago's justice system. "The Truth Project," she said, "because that's what it's always been about." As night fell over the city, Rachel Morgan sat at her desk and began to write, not a legal brief or a motion, but a manifesto, a promise to everyone the system had failed that their stories would be heard, their truths revealed, their justice delivered. The battle against Reynolds was over. The war for justice was just beginning. If you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it seems impossible, like this video, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started and there are many more stories of justice to come.